former federal cabinet minister and Manitoba member of the Legislative Assembly who has been living with quadriplegia since the age of 23 recently spoke to the debates around the MAiD legislation. And Stephen Fletcher said that given the large range of disabling conditions, that no one, including disability right groups, can decide for someone else what is tolerable. He said that new safeguards and talk of protecting the vulnerable are, quote, insulting and condescending. I'm going to further quote Mr. Fletcher here. He says, quote, everyone is a minority of one. From that perspective, everyone should have all the rights and responsibilities as everyone else. And when you look at it from that perspective, all those other arguments don't make any sense anymore because we're going to protecting the rights of everyone, period. End of quote. So, Madam Chair, I think of groups in my riding who are huge advocates for inclusion for individuals with varying physical and intellectual disabilities. And just thinking of inclusion and the words of Mr. Fletcher, I'm curious to hear your thoughts, Dr. Brayton. Do you agree that we should all have the same rights and responsibilities as everyone else, and that by not allowing some to participate in MAiD would be moving backwards in terms of inclusion and an infringement on their autonomy as an individual?
I will be very blunt. Mr. Fletcher is not an expert in this area. Mr. Fletcher is a white male who's involved in other work, but is not an advocate for people with disabilities and has no history of looking at the research, the situation, and many of the points raised, I think, by the panelists here would not be something that I would consider Mr. Fletcher expert on. So while I have no disrespect to Mr. Fletcher or even to Senator Petitclerc in terms of their positions on this, I would remind everyone that these are people who are a member of the political class, and they are not members of the communities that we are talking about and for whom we express concern regarding these changes. And to be really clear, I think if we want to really push this out all the way, and I'm not comfortable doing this, but I think the point needs to be made, if you'll pardon the obvious and not intended pun, is that if we understand that singling out a rights group in the context of this legislation, specifically saying that it is people with disabilities for whom this applies, is what is problematic. And that if Mr. Fletcher takes his argument all the way to the limit of his perspective, that what we end up with is the possibility that everyone should have access to MAiD. And of course, we don't think that that's the right solution. I think a lot of experts here have made it really clear that palliative care and other solutions are what we need to address the kinds of problems that drive people to a place where MAiD is the only option they have instead of good palliative care or a quality of life, as with the example I shared earlier in terms of Ruth. And so I believe, like I said, that while I understand the concept, I think there's a real problem here in terms of the reality because we're talking about people who are extremely vulnerable, not about Mr. Fletcher.
Disability advocates participated heavily throughout the consultations, and we truly value what we heard from these groups. And that's why we believe that this legislation strikes the right balance of autonomy and protection of vulnerable people. But I'm wondering how you would suggest, Ms. Brayton, striking the right balance of protection of vulnerable people and also allowing them to maintain their autonomy. I wonder if we can do a deeper dive on that if possible.
I think what's really clear is that there aren't enough protections, that there aren't enough social protections for vulnerable people, Canadians, including people with disabilities. And that the reality is that this legislation is an aspirational piece of legislation that, while I understand some people believes is towards enshrining the rights of individuals to make choice, that they have missed the reality check I think we all have to have. The majority of human rights complaints in this country are disability related, sir. The United Nations has expressed concern to Canada with respect to even entertaining this kind of change in legislation. And I really believe that it's an important opportunity for legislators to take a moment, take pause, to do the 5-year review, as has been suggested by other members of this panel, and to slow down this process. It's critical that we take a step back. As I said, I don't think anybody here wants to regret making an egregious decision in legislation that's going to take away people's lives. And I'm afraid that's where we are. That's not based on anything that has been presented here, of course, because we haven't had objective evidence presented. And I think that's another key issue.